Welcome everyone, Christine here with a discussion about Gorbad Ironclaw in Total War Warhammer 3 Immortal Empires. This is the same campaign I've been uploading on YouTube. In fact, the last video I did is the final video of this campaign. Everything else after that particular point is just like, well, the last few turns have been non-stop settlement battles. That's not particularly interesting, so as far as I'm concerned, the campaign is over. Like, Kazakhstan is under siege. Once I'm done with that, there's no other threat, nothing here except potentially Forik and to some extent Manfred, if I care really about Galbraith, that could pose a challenge. So let me give you my perspective as best as I can about Gorbad. I think his starting position is actually fairly interesting. I think as a legendary lord from a special skill line situation and Lord effect situation is quite good. His special skill line does give you certain significant benefits in your campaign. You do get unique scrap upgrades as well. You get the boss has a plan, the character experience gain. It's not as nowhere near as much as Skarsnik, but at least it is something unique to him. So this starting position where you can take Carricade Peaks at the end of turn 1 by forcing a battle and confederating it at the beginning of turn 2 is a good starting position. Combine that with the victory conditions, which force you to take control over the entire battlelands in order to quote-unquote win the campaign, and it can create a fairly interesting and dynamic campaign experience with a lot of possibilities. That's good. And in this case, I had hoped that Skarsnik might win against Forgrim. That didn't happen. I hoped that Queek would secure the south. That didn't happen. I had to bail him out by building an entire stack over here just to fight Emmerich for him, otherwise he would have been obliterated. So yeah, things didn't go as planned, but that's good, that's fine. That is what makes an entertaining campaign. In fact, that's one of the reasons Malachi's campaign is so entertaining, because you might have a plan as Malachi. Chances are, a very high chance, that things will not go according to plan in that campaign. And if that was the case overall with the campaign and the mechanics of the campaign, I would say it's a really good campaign. But it is not. Lord Effect, Special Skill Line, starting position, those work. The Greenskins, after their rework, I think they're in a pretty solid spot. More unit variety than you had before. And a nerf, certainly, but one that was warranted in terms of their economy, because let's just say that pre-patch you could get to like 4, 5, 6 stacks very damn quickly in your campaign and just steamroll everything without caring in the world. So that is good. I mean, you could outnumber the Skaven. Like, you could have more armies than the Skaven, and that's in a situation where Skaven would spam clan rats and Skaven slaves. That was pretty ridiculous. So now it's more about quality, unit diversity, and so on and so forth. All well and good. But the principal mechanic of Gorbad is obviously the plan. But first, let's talk about faction effects. The increased rewards from successfully completing a WA feel pretty pointless, because in a campaign, there's maybe going to be 1 or 2 WAs that are actually going to matter, where you might actually benefit from those increased rewards. Raising settlements, completely pointless, because regardless of the income that you're gaining over here, you're always going to get far less income from raising a settlement than just either looting and occupying it or sacking it. Now sure, that leaves the settlement intact, but there's very few factions in the game that benefit from raising a settlement. Khorne, for instance, but that's because you're gaining other things like skulls or blood hosts that justify that. You're not really gaining that if you're playing as the Greenskins. So for all the benefits that Gorbad can get in terms of raising settlements, and not just for the faction effect, but also through the drag the battle wagons benefit, it ends up not really being worth doing that. That leaves you with global recruitment and the plan. Global recruitment, yes, that's a nice benefit. It works. It allows you to recruit armies faster at the cost of spending a lot more on them. Fair enough, it's a trade-off. It works. But as for the plan, this is why I think it doesn't work. So what is the purpose of the plan? Well, the purpose of the plan, according to CA themselves, according to a lot of people that talk about this, is to incentivize you to diversify your armies because it makes a lot more unit combinations viable. It does not work like that. In theory, it does, and you might get the initial impression that it does, but in reality, there's very little incentive to diversify your armies in a significant way because of the plan. I mean, there are some benefits to be sure, but the idea that you're going to run around with completely different armies, diverse armies, is not really going to work. And that does tie to the way the plan works, but also ties to how we recruit armies and why we recruit armies the way we do. So the way we recruit armies is obviously we need structures. And since the meat of any campaign is in the early game, even with Cavalcade Peaks and all the building slots, you're just not going to have the resources to construct all the build unit recruitment that you'd want for all these types of units. So minus 1 point for unit diversity in that respect. I mean, later on you can, but you're always incentivized to specialize one way or another. Partly because of buildings, partly because of money, unit costs. Some units are cheaper than others, upkeep, all that. And then there's the Lord skill situation. You can't just get every army skill to really make full use of these units. Now, sure, some of these skills are not necessarily too important, but others absolutely are. So if you really want to make certain units work very effectively, you do need to have enough general skills to make that work. And the plan is, in a lot of ways, not enough to offset what you might lose in that respect. Like, sure, if we had unlimited skills for our generals, that would be a different situation, but we do not. We have to pick and choose combat ability, blue scale line, army skill. So it's much better to always specialize in that respect. It's also better to specialize your army, partly because of the way auto resolve works, partly because of the way replenishment works, the unit recruitment structures, and also the actual survivability of units in combat and their usefulness in a wide range of battle scenarios. And especially, and I've said this to CA themselves, sieges. It doesn't matter how good an army is in an open field battle, because you're going to end up in a lot of settlement battles. Naturally, you're going to end up in a lot of siege battles. That is always going to happen. You can't just run around with an entire army of wolf riders and then expect to do well in a campaign. You may not necessarily care about that, but ultimately the vast majority of people play to win campaigns, and the vast majority of people seek the easiest way to win. Does the plan help people win with a greater diversity of units? I wouldn't say so. In fact, it's a trap. It's an easy way, in fact, to make you to waste your resources thinking that the benefits that you're going to get are worthwhile, when in reality they're not. There are some things that are worthwhile, but very few and far between. And the things that are actually worthwhile are actually to the detriment of the unit diversity. So point is, in sieges, we want infantry, we want artillery, we want range units. Cavalry, we don't want to maximize that. And if we want cavalry, we'd ideally want good charge cavalry, but in some limited quantities, partly because of how we control in battles, partly because of casualties. Another thing with regards to infantry, we want infantry that is durable, armored, because armored units do better in auto-resolve, armored units take fewer casualties in battle, and the best way to build an army is not to build an army that can win you a battle, but an army that can win you a battle with minimal casualties. If you can walk away out of a battle with like 20 units lost, as opposed to several hundred, then yeah, the army that has 20 units lost is a significantly better army. That's simply the reality. Is one of the reasons why, if you're playing any of the Chaos factions, recruiting demon units, at least the early game ones, things like Bloodletters, Plague Bearers, Nurglings, all that, is a significant waste of resources in your campaign as opposed to the Mortal units, which just have that durability. Never mind that demon units also have a habit of disintegrating and you can lose them. And the demon reforging for Skulltaker does go a long way towards fixing that, but not necessarily so, and it takes a while to unlock it. There's no reason even in a Skulltaker campaign to recruit demon units, unless we're talking about higher tier stuff. And that's a different ball game altogether. So we are interested in units with a good enough durability, good enough auto-resolve score, and army compositions that help with that. That is one of the biggest problems with the plan, because you can't just make a system like this in a vacuum. It's all tied together to how the game works. And a lot of these benefits are not necessarily going to be that special. Like, consider this. Oh, you get net them up for goblin infantry units. Reduces missile block chance, cannot move. Could be useful against cavalry, you might think so, sure. But the main benefit here would be 15% missile strength for missile cavalry and chariot units. Let me just put it as bluntly as I can. Missile cavalry and chariot units are never going to be as useful as proper range units, regardless of their mobility. They don't have the ammo, they don't have the damage. I've played an entire campaign with goblin wolf rider archers. They were a complete waste of resources in the army. It would have been far better just getting free goblin archer units. That is how useless these guys were. Why did I run around with it? It wasn't even a combat benefit. It was literally because you can get the raiding party benefit for 25% income from sacking and looting settlements. But consider that, for instance, Grimgor might get better post-battle loot, or Azak might get better post-battle loot, as opposed to having to use a slot that requires special resources and requires you to give up free unit slots in an army to make use of that effect. Complete waste of resources over there, as an example. There are many other examples. There are, of course, some things that are inherently good to have, like 20% winds of magic cost, 25% cooldown, 5 winds of magic power capacity. But that's kind of the point as well. Like, the idea that this allows you a greater diversity doesn't hold up, because a lot of the effects are fluff or just plain pointless, and other effects are really good. Like, why wouldn't you want this significant spell benefit unless you literally don't have a caster in an army, for instance? Why wouldn't you want, for instance, as another example, regimental, minus 15% upkeep, minus 30% vigor loss reduction, 10% campaign movement range? There's practically no effect that can compare with those two. So that just leaves you one slot that you might mess around with. And even then, not necessarily so, because again, there are certain effects that you could strongly argue are significantly better to have in an army than others. Beyond the fact that certain effects, or a lot of the effects that you see here, are not especially great. Actually, the third effect, if you want to know which would be worth it, would actually be this one. If you're looking for a high tier army, being able to attack in tunneling stance. Yeah, that is those three effects: the magic benefit, the campaign movement range and upkeep, vigor loss, and the ability of engaging with tunneling, that those are so far ahead of everything else, it isn't even funny. So the idea of diversity, it's a false promise at best. You do have effects that are worth it, but the idea you have variety, I've tried playing with variety. I would have been far better off had I flat out ignored it in terms of my army compositions. Like, this is one of the reasons I played this campaign. I wanted to try and get, as some of these effects unlocked. I wanted to try and play with these effects, and my conclusion, not freaking worth it. That is something I concluded before I played this campaign, but I just wanted to prove a point. Not worth it at all. Go with regimental, go with the magic effect, and long term, either go with the battle wagons benefit or go with the sneaky rogues, or maybe go with the savage orc benefit, because that can also be useful. Specifically, the benefit of surprise savagery, which gives you 25% resistance for nasty skulkers, and vanguard deployment for savage orc units, or superior savagery for savage orc units, kind of. Versus regimental, magic benefits. I mean, this army doesn't have magic, but still. And getting another shaman could be more difficult, but would I have been better off had I just recruited a bunch of savage orc biguns led by a savage orc shaman? Yeah, probably so. That might have been a better army and a better allocation of resources, especially when you consider that savage orc shaman can actually give you 10% physical resistance for orc infantry and leadership for orc infantry units. yeah, it's totally worth recruiting nasty skulkers just so they get some physical resistance compared to just recruiting a bunch of savage orcs. You might save some money, I suppose, but it doesn't end up being worth it. And that's all assuming you even have the availability to use the plan, because that's another problem. The only way to get access to the plan is to have these plans, this resource. But this resource can only be won by Gorbad. Now, early on in the campaign, this is not an issue at all. But as you play through the campaign, you will run out of plans. You will not be able to maintain these effects. Now, what people will counter is saying, well, you see, all you gotta do is level up your lord, and you'll get access to unlimited slots. That doesn't work out because you need level 30. This is a turn 36 campaign. I have fought quite a few battles in this campaign. I'm level manually. I've chased down enemies. I've tried to maximize my experience. I'm level 22 on Gorbad. I'm level 17 on this guy who's been fighting Emmerich for, I don't know, the last 20 turns or so, close to it. The idea that you're going to be able to get enough lords to level 30 to keep those plans active, the only point you do so is at the stage of a campaign where it doesn't matter anymore. And even at that stage of the campaign, you'd still run out of plans. The reason being that at that particular stage of the campaign, you'd be running with doubled armies that I have right here. Like right now, I have 6 armies. Let's say 5, because 1 is not really an army. I have 5 armies. Give me 10 turns, 20 turns, I'll be running with double that. You do not have enough plans to even push this on all your armies. So even if you wanted to get all those combat effects that you can get for units, you literally couldn't afford it. So the scalability of the plans effect does not work out. Maybe if we had more character experience benefit, I feel like Gorbad could actually use that 100% character experience benefit far more so than Skarsnik, or replace the rating benefit, or give Skarsnik the global recruitment duration benefit and give Gorbad the character experience, because as it currently stands, it is a system that in a lot of ways does not achieve its purpose. It does not necessarily give you the army variety that you want in a way that is actually good and effective. It does not maintain itself, unlike many other systems in the game that do maintain themselves. So those are some of the problems that exist with the plan, and why I think as a system overall it's just fluff. It's not workable. It's not worth engaging in it. It's not worth bothering with it. Just go with regimental, go with the magical benefit, and if you can get rogue idols, get those. Get that tunneling attack stance, or being able to attack for tunneling, and that's it. Don't bother with anything else. It is a waste of resources. It is a waste of your time, and it is not worth engaging in. That's the problem. Like, that's the issue with Gorbad's entire campaign. It's not a bad campaign. He's not a bad legendary lord. He has a great dynamic campaign with good lord effects, good special skill line. But his unique campaign mechanic is worse than so many other campaigns in the game, and easily one of the worst even in this DLC. Like, compare this to Skulltaker, or compare this to Golkfag, or compare this to Arbol. Vastly inferior as a campaign system. And I'll be honest, I was quite disappointed. I know the lore about Gorbad. I had hoped for a lot more. I knew pretty much what we were going to get in terms of starting position, and it actually panned out a lot better than I had hoped it would. But in terms of actual unique campaign mechanics, I think it's worth... Like, if you want to play a campaign in this area, play Skarsnik. He's a much better campaign at the moment. In fact, Skarsnik, when you play him, he actually has better variety in his campaign than Gorbad does. One of the reasons is that Skarsnik, with Skarsnik, once you take Caracade Peaks, you get stock stance on every army. So you're actually incentivized with Skarsnik. Oh, how do I make these very effective ambush armies to work? Like, you can go brute force, big guns, black orcs, and all that. But you can also make a lot of units that otherwise wouldn't work in a straight-up battle, nowhere near as well. You can make them work for those ambush situations. Now, of course, you still run into the issue of settlements, But at least you have genuine variety that you can access in regular battles. And yeah, just Confederate Gorbad and use him in a Scarsony campaign is a much better situation and a much better use of his character than what you get when you play Gorbad's campaign. And that's pretty sad as far as I see it. Costin signing out, stay tuned for more.